Welcome to WizeUp. I'm Paul Arthur. Today I want to tackle the somewhat controversial topic of recently discovered sexually graphic books in Alberta school libraries. We're talking like K to 12, so kindergarten kids. Yeah, before we jump in there, a quick reminder to hit subscribe if you enjoy our program and tell your friends about us as well. Why do some people think this type of material in a public school library, accessible by even kindergarten kids, is okay? A bit of a head scratcher, isn't it? Our guest today from Calgary, JoJo Ruba. He's a Christian apologist, executive director of Redeeming Conversations, their website, redeemingconversations.ca. JoJo, why don't we start with just a brief description of what your organization's all about?
Glad to be here, Paul. My organization, one that I think is so critical right now, is aimed at helping Christians engage in thoughtful conversations with non-believers, especially on the topics such as this one that have become obstacles to faith, that people use as an excuse to say, I don't want to become a Christian because they're mean and nasty and they're rude and all kinds of things, and they're anti-gay and anti-sex, which is, the furthest thing from the truth, really. So part of what we want to be able to do is help Christians know we have good answers to share, and they're good answers worth sharing because they're still good news.
Yeah, and this is one of those topics that can cause us to get angry at each other and to clash and, rather than an opportunity to shine some light on the conversation here and actually have a respectful dialogue on it. So, of course, this last week, the Alberta government making headlines with their announcement that a number of books containing graphic sexual content discovered in public school libraries. Again, we're talking available to students from kindergarten upwards. My question is, I guess, why are these books in our school libraries? Any thoughts there, JoJo?
Well, there's several things. There's 4 books in particular that were highlighted in a survey sent out by the Alberta government. And I highly encourage everyone out there watching to go fill it out yourself. You can also look at these images and make that judgment yourself. Let me warn you, they're very graphic.
Oh, yeah, I took a look, and this does not belong in any schools in Alberta. Thank you.
No, they show explicit sexual acts, and without going into details, like body parts, sexual activity that are explicitly being shown for sexual purposes, and then explained at a level where, like you said, kindergarten kids, anyone in elementary school can see them, and it's very graphic. Now, you're asking.
Yeah, these aren't pictures. Just to clarify, these aren't like photographs or videos, but they're drawings. Okay, but they're very explicit. It'll certainly get your attention, even as an adult and as kids. Okay, right? And there's also hints of pedophilia, looks like, and even incest potentially. I'm kind of going, wow.
Yeah.
Like, what's the author thinking here, right?
And I think that's important too. I remember when I was in grade school or maybe even middle school, my dad bought a set of books about sexuality, and they would show drawings of male and female body parts, but they were like people showering, and they were labeling the body parts. It was not sexual at all in terms of activity. Mm-hmm. What we're talking about here in the material is a narrative, is a story that involves sexual activities, and even though it's a picture, it's drawn images. They're lifelike images, so they're not photos, but they're definitely lifelike in terms of their narrative.
It seems to be designed to get young minds to experiment, if you will, perhaps. I'm guessing, yeah, probably for sure. Probably for sure? I think for sure. Okay. All right.
Yeah, to your initial question, Paul, I think that's the part of the answer is they want to introduce these concepts, particularly homosexuality, because all of this material is from LGBTQI books. So
maybe I'll jump in there and say that's one of the protests here from the Alberta Teachers Union, right, Alberta Teachers Association. They're saying, well, hey, wait a minute, Alberta government, you're picking on LGBT people again. That's not right. Is that the issue? I don't think that's the issue, even though those, that is part of the content, of course.
Yeah, no, it's not an issue at all. If this was material depicting heterosexual sexual activity, would just be as graphic, and we should oppose it just as much. But to your point, and I think this is what's key here, that's underlying the assumption of why these books need to be in libraries. And by the way, for your audience, they found 4 of these books, the 4 that they're talking about, in Alberta libraries. So this is not even in question that this is just being made up. These are actually in libraries until they were pulled because of this legislation.
And I should point out, Jojo, that the reason they were discovered is not because the Alberta government was diligently researching their public school libraries. Parents found out, and how do you think the parents found out? Their kids told them. Right? So they went to talk to their MLAs or to the education ministry, and they were shocked by what they found. But, man, we really need to keep their feet to the fire here, I think.
Yeah, we've been warning about this for a while. Different groups have been warning about these for a while. Some of these books were already highlighted a few years ago by parents who discovered them, and it's taken this time to bring it to the government.
So you're saying that a couple of years ago, this is already taken to members of the Legislative Assembly, and they didn't do anything about it?
No. It was already something discovered, and they were wanting to bring it to the Legislative Assembly. So I don't know the timeline between then and now, but I do understand parents groups have been raising these concerns for a while because of things like gay-straight alliances, where resources like these were available. And we know in Saskatchewan, a year and a half ago or so, the Planned Parenthood came in there, spoke at a public school, and they had graphic images similar to the ones in these books. And these books are actually, some of them are banned in places in the States. And now let me correct myself. I think that's important because there's a couple of questions here I want to rectify. First of all, no one is banning these books. Right? What we're doing is we're allowing for and we're advocating for child restrictions, age restrictions on these books, so that you have to be a certain age to be able to read them. Just like alcohol or just like movies have age restrictions, these resources are not banned, but we recognize the child development that's not that stage they're at that prevents them from truly understanding what they're actually watching, and that's why we prevent them from watching violence or sexually explicit material. Gosh, in Quebec, they prevent sugary cereals from being advertised on TV because they recognize child development will not allow them to understand the consequences of eating sugary cereals. Right, so this is the same thing. No one is banning any book.
You can smoke if you want, but if you're under 18, you can't buy cigarettes in Alberta. There's a good reason for that.
And so these books will be available to these young people when they turn 18. That's the whole point. Right? There's no one banning it. So I think we need to stop using their language on that. But secondly, to the point I asked earlier, why are these books in the library in the first place? Because when it comes to the LGBTQ community particularly, I think there's a real desire to make sexuality the core of your identity. It defines who you are. And so you want to be able to make that identity available to young children as soon as possible, to get them to know that they can identify with the sexual attraction or sexual behavior. And if you actually read the materials that were made available to us from the government through the survey, you begin to see that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to normalize identity. The challenge is that that's not their right to do that. Parents have a primary right to shape the identity of their child. And I think most importantly, for everybody, whether you're LGBTQ identified or not, ultimately we are so much more than our sexual attractions.
Yes.
And the challenge of these books is it makes that affection or those feelings the most important thing about you. It's the thing that we have to define ourselves as. And as a Christian, we recognize, no, it's not our sexuality. It's our Savior who defines us because he made us and he knows us and loves us best. And sure, people have all kinds of attractions, all kinds of behavior, all kinds of activities. And again, the government isn't banning books that discuss that. The problem is these books explicitly illustrate that for young children in a way that you wouldn't allow, that the government or other regulations wouldn't allow these children to see that in a movie theater, because it'd be rated X in a movie theater, not PG-13. Like this.
And when you find this in a public school library, I think the assumption is that this has been approved. They're saying, the authorities that be are saying this is okay for your children. Now, I'm guessing the majority of parents watching would disagree with that. So I guess let me ask this. Who is it that makes the decision as to which you know, books end up on the school library shelves, and what kind of standards are they working with? I mean, who are these people? Who gives the thumbs up?
Well, that's part of it. So there's an association. I forget the exact name of it, Paul, but there's an association. The library associations are saying we have vetted it through these associations, right? We have rectified it with other groups that are provincial or national, and that's fine. But ultimately, school libraries, just like schools, are accountable to the parents who send their kids to those schools. And if
Mm-hmm.
parents object to that, they have a right to object to that. The government of Alberta has a right to say, no, we're going to listen to Alberta parents. We're going to remove these books until these kids are 18. They're old enough to read it for themselves. Pornography is available for free online in all kinds of ways. And kids as young as 12 or 13 years old, I think the stats show the majority of kids at 12 or 13 have already accessed pornography. What we need to be able to understand, especially for parents, youth pastors, adults who take care of kids, teachers, is that we don't have to encourage that. We can discourage that. And we can have honest conversations on sexuality, on pornography. We can have honest conversations on the consequences of seeing sex through the lens of these materials that glorifies it, that doesn't give a spiritual dimension to it, that just highlights the sexual attraction or behavior. And we can have that without these graphic images. That's the
Mm-hmm.
conversation we should be having. And I would just say I would encourage parents to have those conversations so that the people making these regulations will stop thinking they're the only solution to educating kids about sex.
Yeah, I think that's one of the arguments that is coming up from folks like the Alberta Teachers Association and other activist groups, the LGBT community, is that that is a fact that the vast majority of, like I say, 12, 13-year-olds, 11-year-olds, I'm sure as well, and younger, have been exposed to online pornography. It's just so easily accessible. So they're saying, hey, it's there already, so we're just going to give them some education, some healthy boundaries and so forth. But, when you look at those books, it sure doesn't look like any kind of healthy boundaries that I'd be inclined toward. Right? So I understand the logic in one sense, but I mean, again, is this maybe like the fox, guarding the hen house here? It seems to me that there's a lot of activist folks that try to get their way into our school curriculums, our after-school curriculums, or after-school clubs to, steer the pendulum how they view the world. And again, this to me undermines parental rights. And that's why this survey being done by the Alberta government is so key. What an opportunity. Now, depending on when this particular taping that we're doing today airs, it may already be too late. June 6th is the deadline, 2025, to fill out this online form. And again, I'm sure that there'll be people from the activist communities and the teachers associations that'll be filling this form in as well. So if we're concerned parents, we want to make sure that we get as many people as possible, filling it out, as I would see it, the correct way. And hopefully bring some influence that way. Now, beyond the actual deadline for the filling out the online survey, I think we need to keep on going and talk to our politicians, the influencers, right? Hey, you know what? We have municipal elections coming up not that far off. Opportunity to vote in some better school board trustees, perhaps? Just
Yeah.
saying.
Absolutely. Listen, ultimately, I think you alluded to that, Paul. No worldview is neutral. And the
Mm-hmm.
people pushing for this kind of sexual or education are pushing for a view of sexuality and gender that is not just unchristian, but I know members of the LGBTQ community who would be very uncomfortable
Mm-hmm.
showing these kinds of materials to young people as well. So it's not an anti-gay
Yeah.
thing. It's
Yeah.
about child development, it's understanding that children particularly are vulnerable to idealization of sexuality, where they will not actually be satisfied with real sex in real life because they've idealized it through pornography. There's all kinds of studies that show the kind of harm that takes place when you become addicted to pornography. And you're absolutely right. Particularly as Christians, we think politics is a dirty thing, but politics is really just the affairs of the city. That's the origin of the word politics. And that means we have to be, if we love our neighbor, involved in the affairs of our city, including
Mm-hmm.
what's being taught in public school. Why? Because those kids in public school will be future prime ministers and hockey stars and business people, nurses and doctors. and they're going to change society for the good or for the ill. And the more
Hmm.
we sort of not talk about these issues, the more people will be prone to all kinds of harm. One of the reasons why scripture is so keen that we ought to follow God's design for sex is because there are so many ramifications of what happens when we don't. Whether it's unwanted pregnancy or abortions, sexually transmitted infections, gender confusion, all of these things happen when we don't follow God's design for sex. And now we have institutions in the schools of secular people saying and thinking that the only way for us to talk about sex is to celebrate every kind of sexual behavior, including one that you said alluded to, incest and child molestation. It's just wow. Like when I saw that, I'm like, is that really what they're saying? It wasn't. It was subtle, right? But
Yeah.
it felt like that's what they were heading towards. And you begin to realize we're at a point where if we don't intervene, good people, godly people don't intervene, this will get far worse.
Yeah, this is really for the good of our society. This is an ongoing battle of, I guess, worldviews, as you pointed out, and we need to get involved. Again, not with hateful comments, not with angry, memes and this and that. I mean, these are real people that were, they I mean, God loves them as well, but there is such a thing as right and wrong, particularly with moral and sexual issues that can have lasting consequences in our lives and in our society. I'm just, in the news over the last number of weeks and months. We have these former NHL players on trial for sexual assault, right? Okay, well, the case isn't done yet, but all of us look at that and kind of go, huh, is that where we're at, really? Is that where we want to be at as a society?
Well,
I
there's a
hope
high
not, right? There's no proud parents in that one, I don't think,
there's
for those NHL parents. Yes, they love their kids, but I think they're all very regretful as to what happened that night, whether or not it was criminal. Still, lots of concerns about what occurred, and is that a good thing in our society, right? So how do we get there from here? Well, I would venture a guess that pornography and early exposure. I don't know that for sure for these five individuals here, but this sort of thing though contributes toward that kind of behavior down the road, I think.
Yeah, well, in pornography, I forget the exact stat, but it's over 10% of pornographic images glorify sexual violence, right? So
Yeah.
it's something that is normalized in porn. And when you actually expose kids to pornographic images at a young age at school, that definitely normalizes it for them to explore further kinds of pornographic images. It's like a gateway drug. And again, these are the kinds of studies that need to be done. These are the kinds of things that need to be researched because ultimately what's happening is we're experimenting on these kids with these kinds of educational actions and activities. This is the kind of experimentation we don't need because we already see the consequences of sinful and harmful behavior when it comes to sexuality. And I want to just add too, Paul, I think it's important for people in Alberta to understand no other province has this opportunity for its population to push back on this kind of imagery in the kids' books in their public schools.
Yeah,
So
well, I have to take hats off as far as, again, I can't get into, this party over that party, but I say hats off to our current Alberta government for actually giving us that opportunity.
that's right. So
Yeah,
there are people I know in Ontario who are saying, I wish we could have this here too. And they
yeah.
have a conservative government as well. So
Hmm.
it's important for us in Alberta to really thank the government that they're doing this and to take advantage of this opportunity. Because if it was another party, frankly, they wouldn't do. They would actually be pushing this kind of stuff. So it's important for us to take advantage of it. They're wise in being able to consult the Alberta public.
Hmm.
Like I said, whether you're right or left, gay or straight or whatever you identify, I think once you see these images, you need to start thinking, should my 7-year-old be able to access these images? And I think most common sense parents will say no. And if they do say yes, I think most of them would say, those people would say, it should be up to me to educate my child about that, not someone in a room with 30 other kids.
Hmm. Well, we were chatting before the program here. You had mentioned one of the authors of one of the books actually is on record as saying this book is not for kids. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We just saw that in a social media post, and I'm just making sure I get the exact quote here. Maya Kobabe, the author of Genderqueer, is one of the four books that are highlighted by the government. This person actually said Genderqueer is a comic, but that doesn't mean it's for children. I don't recommend this book for kids, and that's from the Washington Post in September on September 14th, 2023. So there's the exact
Wow.
quote. I don't recommend this book for kids, and yet it's being put in libraries for K to 12.
Wow. Okay. So again, who's making these decisions, right? And they've sounds like the government has just delegated this to these various associations that kind of, I guess, plug their books and, offer books to school libraries and so forth. We think this is appropriate. Well, who are you handing off this authority to? I mean, this is a pretty important authority, right? Again, parents should have the final authority, first of all. So again, I want to encourage people to go to that link, fill out the survey, and if it's past June 6th, then make sure you're talking to your MLAs and, you're talking to the education minister and so forth to make sure this gets paid attention to. So, I mean, I should say this too, we can't rely simply on the government or our school boards to protect our kids from these kinds of things. Ultimately, it does come down to parents. So we need to make sure that we're teaching our kids about this, having these conversations, telling them, explaining what to be on the lookout for, why this is healthy and this is not healthy, sexually speaking and so forth. Really boils down to us. We've got to take up the mantle and make sure we're protecting our kids and informing them as to what's appropriate and what's not.
Yeah, I think there's a line that I've been using that's so important for us to remember, Paul, that it's not just our job to oppose. As Christians, as parents, we need to propose good things. And I think it's important for us to push back on these kinds of books and resources to say, look, there are other resources that we can recommend, that we can create as a province that will teach healthy sexuality, that will help young people understand sexuality at an age appropriate level. So, like little kids, maybe just talk about body parts. Talk about what it means to be a
Hmm.
male or female. Talk about the differences between man and woman, and to celebrate those differences. To know that we can be different yet equal. And as the child begins to develop, gets into puberty, we can begin to talk about the different
Yeah.
ways our bodies develop and change. Those are all good things. Right. No one is opposing talking about that kind of sexuality. What we are saying is that these books are not value neutral. They're teaching sexuality from a very specific position that actually glorifies and puts graphic imagery as the primary way of teaching rather than understanding the physical body that we have is just one part of us. There's also soul that we have. And
Hmm.
that because that soul is important, even if you're not a Christian, we need to recognize we're more than just a body, we're more than just sexuality.
Hmm. Absolutely. And we have value, not because of who we are sexually, but we're made in the image of God. We're all made in His image. So we need to value one another and, be kind and respectful. That's how do we want to see our society function, right? Again, this cancel culture, this clash that's always there. No, we want to be treating our neighbors as we'd want to be treated ourselves, right? The basic golden rule there. So, what are the current rights of parents in our schools? I mean, if there's something being taught in a class that the parent feels is inappropriate, do we have the right to opt out, take our kids out of that class?
Well, the legislation allows for things like sexuality and religion, I think,
Okay.
particularly where you can opt out. But that doesn't mean you can't monitor and find out what your child is learning. And I would highly recommend this as one of our pieces of advice for conversation training for parents is get to know your children's teachers, especially if you go to public school, but even Christian schools now.
Mm-hmm.
Many of them have sexually confused curriculum, and I've seen them. I've seen how they've wrestled with that, and unfortunately, they're not. They're heterodox. They're not biblical in how they teach many of them. So it's important to get to know the teachers, get to know where their heart is at, what their worldview's at. I know of I think it was a school in Ontario, it was a Christian teacher. She actually was teaching at public school, but their secular principal actually said, we're not going to push any of this kind of LGBTQ ideology on the kids. And she
Wow.
just felt so committed to stay at the public school, to honor that principle and work with that community to
Mm.
make sure the kids were taught a healthy view of sex and sexuality, not as an
Yeah.
identity, but it's something that's part of us. And so, getting to know a teacher like that will be wonderful. If you have someone like that, then you need to partner with that teacher. Make sure
Hmm.
she's encouraged. If it's not, then continue to monitor, especially for the younger kids. Have the children be able to trust you enough to tell you what they're learning, so that it's something that you have
Yeah.
an ongoing conversation. And if you're still having a conversation with your teachers when you raise a concern, which you're allowed to do, always, especially here in Alberta, the parents' rights are very critical here. They will not just see you as an angry person who only sees them when you're angry. You got to know them. You got to befriend them
Yeah.
if possible. But you cannot just react. Like I said, don't just oppose,
Yeah.
propose. Make
I
sure you
like that.
be
I like
positive.
that. Yeah.
Uh,
Real briefly,
question.
one other concern, again, we mentioned earlier, the after-school clubs. Parents need to be aware of that too. The gay-straight alliances, that's ongoing. And my
Yes.
understanding is that actually parents are being kept off limits on these particular clubs, right? And
Yeah.
that needs to change in our current legislation. So again, write some letters, some phone calls, emails to our Minister of Education, to the Premier, might go a long way, to your local MLA as well on this particular case.
It doesn't hurt, especially when you start off the school year. Write the principal or talk to the principal, come in, visit the office, and ask him or her, are there any clubs on at the school that my child can join? You don't have to be specific, but when you get the list, and you can do that every semester. You can see if there's an LGBTQ club on the school. There's a Christian club,
Okay.
there's a music club, there's a juggling club. So
Yeah.
now you're at least aware that it's there, and you
Yeah.
can see if, you can talk to your child about what that club's about, and talk to her about,
Absolutely.
about that.
I got to jump in here because of the clock ticking. I want to make
Yes,
a quick plug for, again, filling out the Alberta survey as parents. You need to do that before June 6th. And I want to also put a plug in for redeemingconversations.ca. Great website there. You'll get lots of good info. Thank you, JoJo Ruba, our guest today. Thanks for watching WizeUp.ca, and don't forget to hit subscribe.